This is probably for Jamal. Surely by definition, judgments based on a set of fixed ideas is arbitrary, because those ideas that you choose are arbitrary, what ideas you choose. But judgments based on an assessment of the situation of reality is by definition not arbitrary.
Okay. Well, again, I think the point I kind of addressed, arbitrary or fixed, was that what is the point of reference for those principles we're talking about? Our point of reference for those principles is a text, is the Quran and the Sunnah, i.e. collectively Islamic sources. And the assessment of how we address specific circumstances is based on interpretation of those sources as they apply to given situations. So in terms of the fixed source, we believe that source should be the Islamic texts, and we apply those texts, or how we understand them, to the given situation. As the situation develops, we apply the laws to them. Now, in terms of that being arbitrary, the basis is not that we would determine in that situation and make a decision on the spot, but rather we've got a certain fixed point of reference. We would go back to the Islamic text to refer to it. So it's not arbitrary, it's based on the fact we believe in the principle that this is a revelation from the Creator. We're referring to that text and we're applying it to different circumstances. So it's a fixed point of reference that's applied to different situations. I don't see that as arbitrary in the sense that it's effectively just made up on the spot. Now, again, bring it back to the judgment that Lewis has mentioned about how to judge in different circumstances. He's given the principle of pleasure or flourishing or a number of different terms. But again, that basis of what...
Lewis?
Did I say? Lincoln. Okay. I thought you said Lewis. Okay. No, anyway. But again, even the names can change. They shift according to what produces the most.
There are no absolutes, not even my name.
But if his name is fixed. Okay, so basically, again, it's about how can we judge what is actually going to lead to the greatest amount of welfare. Because, you know, as we said, physical training, someone can say this is self-improving, so that's actually, there's a utility, there's a benefit for it, so it's useful, it's good for society. Someone else, maybe the child who's told you have to go running around the field, 2 miles a day is good for you, it's going to benefit you, doesn't see any benefit. So the teacher who's ordering the students to run around the field, he sees a great utility and benefit for the society. The children who are being told to run around don't feel any benefit, they feel actually pain. So you've got the situation again where you are judging what's beneficial. Effectively, when you look at the crunch, if it comes to the crunch, you haven't got one measure that can tell you what is pleasure, what is increasing pleasure. Because even in the same action, one person judges it as beneficial, as pleasurable, as increasing utility. The same person who may be in the action, maybe another judge making another judgment external to the action, says that action limits and reduces our utility. It reduces the benefit to society. So actually you have something that's completely arbitrary being used as a basis. The same way you could say, for example, with the life of a child who's severely disabled, or again, these people are going to Dignitas, is it in Switzerland, to decide that they want to end their life, assisted suicide. They're saying that my life has no more utility. Whereas others are saying that, no, your life does have utility. You should be able to find meaning. We'll help you find meaning. I will find utility from putting effort into helping you find meaning in your life. So all of these different judgments, everyone's saying, I'm bringing about the situation that yields the greatest utility. And they're doing actions that absolutely contradict each other. Because the actual subject, the utility at hand, or the benefit for society, the pleasure, the progress, all of these things can't be determined.
This is a question for Jamal Deen. A lot of people argue that within the Shari'a law, there are very harsh punishments and very harsh deterrents that Islam applies on people. So, for example, one of the things that a lot of people raise up is the cutting of the hand of the thief. Now, a lot of people say that that's a very harsh punishment, and if that happens, then that's actually not a very viable solution. Say, because if someone finds out later on that it was a wrong implication, a wrong judgment passed on the matter, then he doesn't have the effectiveness of growing another hand. But within maybe, for example, this society, if you give someone a passing judgment on someone in terms of prison sentence, then even though there may be a wrong judgment, there is a certain consequence that can be rebuked, that can be afforded to him. How would you address that issue?
Okay, well, I think on the issue of the punishment system, you talk about the severe punishments. Again, the issue that I would address that from is that effectively that punishment exists to prevent crime. It exists to be a deterrent to the society. And it is a harsh punishment. There's no doubt about that. And it's something that's reserved again for the most severe of circumstances, i.e. where there's absolute clarity that the criminal has actually committed the crimes. There's no doubt involved. Because if there is doubt, you have to go for a lesser punishment, actually a discretionary punishment. But at the maximal level, i.e. where all of the conditions are met, the person is not stealing because of hunger or lack of their basic necessities and so on, in that situation, that punishment is applied. So it's a punishment for the person and it's a deterrent for the rest of the society. Now, again, to look at the situation of, you gave the example of the prison sentence, that's an alternative. Well, there are still consequences for someone who goes to prison. Yeah, you have a criminal record, you'll be denied, work opportunities for the rest of, for a long period into the future. You would actually, be exposed to the atmosphere and environment within prison. And again, that in itself is something that could lead to you being permanently scarred, physically as well as mentally and emotionally. So there will be a consequence of any punishment. There's no system in the world that doesn't have a deterrent element and an element of retribution involved in its punishment system. But again, it comes down to who's going to make the judgment, which punishment is excessive, which punishment is lenient, or which punishment is appropriate. So again, Lincoln's example, Vlad the Impaler, known for impaling people's heads as a punishment, to show people this is what we do with people who commit crime. Now, on a utilitarian basis, one could say that that's acceptable because it brought the result that was desired. What I tempered my statements about Islamic law with, however, in terms of the issue of the hudud, these severe punishments, is that who's the source of that judgment? It's not an arbitrary judgment that's made by Lincoln, myself, or anyone else. That this is how harsh the punishment should be. This is how it should be carried out. These are the circumstances in which someone has met the criteria to be punished. But rather it's coming from a source, it's coming from a revelation. So it's not left to man to make that call on what is the actual amount of benefit that will emerge from that judgment. And therefore it's not something that's arbitrary. So yes, it deals with those concerns that someone may have, that it's completely unfair and there are superior versions of punishment. But at the same time, the fundamental issue is here, who's the source of the law? And when man is the source of the law, you will have this interminable back and forth about what's right, what's wrong, what's harsh, what's not harsh, whose right should be favoured, because there isn't an objective basis upon which people will decide what's right and what's wrong.
Gentleman there, last question is to Jamal. Obviously today, in today's context, we find that secularism is present all over the world, and it's a system that's gained traction in much of the known world. But unfortunately, Sharia doesn't exist. Now, obviously, many Muslims, including myself, would obviously desire to live under such a system that you've described and explained. But because it doesn't exist, it's very hard to picture and conceptualize how it would work within society. So if you could, maybe in today's context, obviously with the Egyptian revolution, I mean, how would you, for example, if the Sharia was to come in Egypt, I mean, what sort of measures and as a system, how would that take the people of Egypt forward, for example, as opposed to secularism? And if Lincoln feels that actually Egypt needs secularism, then obviously if you can present a way, an argument to show actually secularism is better for the future.
Why don't you take Saudi Arabia as your example of how it works?
Okay, first bit.
Okay, well, to address the issue of Saudi Arabia, I think you kind of put that point in this question that does it accept Saudi Arabia as a working model of the Sharia? And I would agree with that assessment because, again, if we look at the implementation of the judicial system within Saudi Arabia, you find elements of it have been actually altered. So, like I mentioned before, there's a very high standard of proof that's required in order to implement the hudud, i.e. to implement the most severe punishments within the Islamic framework. However, in Saudi, you find that they've actually changed some of those, or they actually ignore some of those restrictions. So that means there are a lot of issues that are dealt with as capital crimes, which are not viewed in the i.e. in the normal course of Islamic jurisprudence, if you look at any of the major works of scholars throughout the Islamic world, throughout the Islamic history, you wouldn't find, for example, that in cases of doubt, you are allowed to execute a prisoner. Whereas in Saudi, you would find that this is the case. So it's not presenting a model of what the Sharia is today. In terms of, to briefly explain, give a brief overview of what we believe that system would offer, effectively, you would find that the Islamic system would cater for the basic needs of the society. So it would deal with their economic transactions, it would allow people to seek economic prosperity while dealing with their basic needs. So the state would guarantee the basic needs, food, clothing and shelter and so on, while at the same time allowing people through the ownership of private property, through trade, to seek a living. And that would be the case for Muslims, would be the case for non-Muslims. In terms of the actual the issue of the ruling system, again, the law would be derived from Islamic texts, and that would be something people can contribute to from the society. And that also comes back to Lincoln's point before of clerical rule. You didn't actually find in the Islamic world that you had clerical rule, because fairly early on you found that there were rulers such as the Abbasids and the Umayyads who were actually the rulers, but the legislation, i.e. the derivation of Sharia rules, was something that was done independently. So it wasn't the case that these were people who were ruling and making judgments because they personally would benefit from that legislation. There was actually a strong tradition of scholarly independence from the power, from the state at the time. So you would find that the legislative process, deriving law, would be something that would take place in the Islamic world in order to address the problems in society. In terms of the accountability of the state as well, you'd have what's called a Majlis al-Ummah, or like an Ummah's council, because of the principle of Shura, the principle that people should be able to account the ruler and question not just his implementation of Islamic law, but also in the other areas of life, for example, the road system and other issues of this nature. It's about what's the competence of the execution of the rules in these areas. So there would be action and an environment of accountability for the ruler. And just to come back to this point is again, that i.e. that because you have an Islamic system, that means effectively you have people being led blindly, and this issue of people accepting the Nazi example, the brainwashing and so on. Actually, you find that within the Islamic tradition, one of the famous narrations from the Prophet is that the best form of jihad is the word of truth to a tyrant ruler. So there's actually a strong tradition of accounting the ruler and actually speaking out against injustice. So rather than saying that Islam encourages you to say, okay, well, the ruler, he's been appointed by God and he's infallible and therefore everything he says goes, and we don't exercise any criticism or accountability towards him, actually you find that there is an encouragement